Hi, everyone. Welcome to Thanks for Sharing. I am your host, Jackie Pack, and I have with me today a guest on the podcast, Zoey Charif. Welcome, Zoey.
Thank you so much. Very excited to be here.
Zoey has a fairly new book out on the market where she has created an algorithm for relationships, looking at yourself, whether you're ready to be in relationships, and who you're interested in being in a relationship with. Zoey reached out to me. I think it was you that reached out to me, and I looked at some of your Instagram things. I listened to a podcast or two and thought, yeah, let's go ahead. This will be interesting for listeners. So I'm so glad to have you on today.
Yeah, I'm super excited to be here. Thank you.
And I think you have put out there that you have a background in criminology
Hmm.
and gravitated into relationships based on some personal experiences, but also a personal interest in human behavior.
That's exactly right. So in college, I studied criminology, and I was actually dating someone at the time who ended up cheating on me. So then my laser focus shifted from criminology, crime to love and betrayal. So all of a sudden, I'm like, I need to understand why this stuff happens. And essentially, I developed a theory, and I kept that theory in my back pocket for, I guess, almost 20 years now.
Okay.
And I just published the book about 6 months ago. And yeah, so far, so good. I feel like it's been very helpful in helping people determine and assess their standards, also assess their self-love and understand how they can make relationships work. It's just a new tool essentially to
Yeah.
understand.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I think it's helpful because I think a lot of people are in a situation where they thought they knew this person that they're in a relationship with and then experience betrayal. That's a lot of my audience.
Hmm.
And they are looking for whether that relationship lasts or, and they're working through the betrayal to keep the relationship intact. They're
Yeah.
looking for some dynamics. What needs to happen so that my relationship is more successful? Or for some of
Hmm.
them, they end up ending the relationship and they're back in the dating field looking for something that tells them how to be more successful than they were the last time at
Hmm.
relationships.
Absolutely. So, kind of to tie it into my own experience, I was attracting partners that were not good for me. And here's what I've learned. I learned that so taking a step back and how the framework works
Mm-hmm.
is you identify your top five values and you choose a partner based on those values, essentially, right? I was not having as a top value honesty, dependability, and reliability.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially, I wasn't calling in a rock. I wasn't attracting a rock. I also was not showing up as a rock necessarily. I was maybe showing up as a self-sacrificer, but a rock is something different. It's being there for someone from a place of security, from a place of having the energy to do so, of not, overextending yourself. Whereas self-sacrificing may look like being a rock, but you're just kind of a doormat. And I can say that because I was that, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But that self-awareness is how I actually got to a point where I released all these unhealed patterns, right? I don't like using the word toxic. They can
Mm-hmm.
often look like toxic patterns, but truly, I think it comes from a place where it's unhealed or maybe a lack of self-awareness. So releasing those patterns and then creating new patterns where I feel like I deserve a rock. And
Mm-hmm.
I also want to show up as a rock. I don't want to be a self-sacrificer anymore. So, yeah, with the framework, I think that if there's people out there that are currently back into the dating scene, I would ask you to identify your top five values and then ask yourself, do these values reflect a healthy relationship? If you're severely focused on materialism, image, career, finances, those are all great things, right? We're human, right? Sometimes we like that lifestyle. No issue with that.
Mm-hmm.
But are you adding in there honesty and dependability and reliability? Are you adding in there communication, style, and manners? Because if you're not, like I said, A, you're not going to attract that. B, you're not going to show up in a way that's conducive to a healthy relationship.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. When you realized, did you think you were trying to attract people who were honest, dependable, reliable? And what was the shift in your thinking that allowed you to see that actually that's not who you were falling in love?
Totally. A
Yeah,
hundred
yeah.
percent. So initially, I'm like, well, I'm a self-sacrificer. I love this person so much. If I give my all, then maybe they will see it and maybe they'll feel like they can't live without me. And I'm sorry, that was bullshit. It was bullshit because it wasn't coming from a place of security. It was coming from a place of infatuation.
Mm,
And I'll actually dive into the analytics in a second in terms of why infatuation actually will not lead to a sustaining relationship. But once I recognized that I myself was not scoring myself appropriately and my self-esteem was not where it needed to be, that's when I realized that I was not approaching relationships in a healthy way, right? So if it's okay, I'm going to dive into the
yeah,
analytics a
yeah,
little
please
bit.
do.
Sure. So here's what we found. We found that the couples who are currently together tended to score themselves high and their partner slightly higher. In other
Mm,
words, they admired their partner, not to the extent where it's infatuation. So a scoring for infatuation would look like a self score of maybe 70% and a partner score of 90%. That 20% difference is not healthy. That's where self-sacrificing comes in. That's where being a dependent comes in. That's where unhealed patterns such as neediness, jealousy, oversensitivity will come in, right? Not healthy. So the ideal range is 4%. Okay. It
okay.
doesn't mean you have to break up with the person. It means that you have to convince yourself that you are indeed an 85% if this person is a 90%, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So this is nothing at all about objectivity and this person is objectively a 90%. No, no, no. Everyone has their own values. Everyone is attracted to different traits, right? So, but with that said, you are fully in control of how you view yourself. If you are going on a date and you've just had your heart broken, and that heartbreak has now seeped into your subconscious where you feel like you are not showing up as a strong human, as a good human, as a human who deserves love, that will show on your date. Okay, if you come into this date and you've just swiped right on someone that in your mind you think is a 90%, right? In your mind,
Hmm.
and you come into this date thinking you're 70% for those values, like it's gonna show. And with that said, remember when I said that the healthiest relationships and those sustaining relationships are when there's a slight admiration. The goal is for them to slightly admire you. If you're coming in as insecure, showing in your body language and how you speak and your demeanor and the self-sacrificing, right? That person will subconsciously clock that you are less than them.
Mm,
Okay.
yeah.
And I don't mean to make it sound like such a like a non-emotional thing when it comes to dynamics, right? In fact, this framework absolutely acknowledges emotions. It absolutely acknowledges love. But what it says is that you have to love yourself before you can love someone else. If you want someone to love you, you need to show up with self-love, self-respect. And in this framework, we call it the self-score. How do you score yourself based on your own values? How do you measure up to your own standards? And if you measure up well, believe me, you will show up at that dinner with a glow, with an inner glow, right? If someone happens to say something triggering, you're not going to react. You're going to
Hmm.
take it, with solid communication, with a smile on your face, and either tell the person to go F themselves gently, right? Or you'll just be open, right?
Right.
So that's, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I have said to couples before, I've been a mental health therapist for 31 years. So I've worked with a lot of couples over that time period. And there is something you start to pick up working with couples. And one of those things that you're talking about that I have seen is, yeah, both people in the relationship need to feel lucky to be with their partner, right? That's something that works, that admiration of the other, while not feeling like I'm less than, but also having that admiration for your partner gets you through some of those tough times. I think also
Absolutely.
there's a friendship quality there that when I'm working with single clients and they really haven't done the healing work of
Hmm.
themselves,
Hmm.
I will say you might get lucky and go on dates with somebody, but if you don't value yourself,
Hmm.
you're probably not going to stay. You're going to do something to self sabotage that takes you out of that relationship. The other person cannot be the one who makes you feel good about yourself if you're
Exactly.
not feeling good about yourself.
Exactly. And that's actually what we identified. So in the framework, there are three relationship zones that you could fall in: red zone, yellow zone, green zone.
Okay.
Okay. The red zone is when two people have low scores. So it's a match, but it's a match of low scores. In other words, a match of low self-esteem. That this is usually where trauma lives.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So whether it's dysfunctions when you were growing up in the household, whether it's a heartbreak that you haven't been able to get over, or even something to do with work and nothing with love, right?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Essentially, these are, life events that cause you to maybe not have the healthiest approach or understanding of love. Okay. So that's red zone. Now there's yellow zone. Yellow zone is when one person has a low score, the other person has a high score, and two people are in agreement with this. Okay.
Mm, okay.
Usually it's a feedback loop, right? Because remember, if you have a low self-score, you'll clock it in that person's brain subconsciously that you are
Mm-hmm.
less than them. So it's usually two people in agreement, right? Like tacitly.
Even if it's subconscious. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. It's a very quiet thing, right? But here's what happens. If you have a low score and you're with someone who has a high score, they will feel unfulfilled. You will feel that. You will become overly sensitive. You may feel hurt by small things that they're doing. You may feel jealous by things that really hadn't were not,
Threatening the
shady in any
relationship or
way
yeah.
or threatening the relationship. Yeah, better way to put it. Right? And what's going to happen is if you communicate that over and over again, and nothing wrong with communication, but if the communication is coming from a place of low self-esteem, i.e., the low self-score, you will drain the other person and you're going to validate within their minds that they're better and they can do better. And I don't mean to sound harsh. What I
Mm-hmm.
am doing here is telling you that the analytics are showing that if they feel they're coupled with someone with a lower score, they will feel unfulfilled. Now, there are people out there with a mortgage, with kids, so even if they feel that way, they may not leave, and that's fine. But the goal to be with someone is not to, like, you know, um, like you don't want to feel like you're in a forced dynamic. You don't want
Mm-hmm.
to just, go through your days on autopilot, like, oh, I'm taking care of responsibility. And you also don't want to be in a best friendship or in a roommate type of dynamic.
Right.
You want to be in a relationship. Everyone wants to feel in love, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't mean if you've identified that you are in a yellow zone relationship, it doesn't mean that you have to stay there. You can absolutely boost yourself up. That actually takes me to my next point, which is the green zone. The green zone in our analytics was they were the people who were currently together, people who had a high self score, i.e., high self worth, who also saw their partner as a catch. Why? Because the partner was 4% higher on average, right? Actually, if it's okay, I would love to kind of give my own example with my husband,
Yeah,
in
sure.
terms of how this plays out. So, my husband and I, we met maybe 6 months into the relationship. I asked him to do the framework with me. Okay. I gave him, I think, 5% above me. So a couple of things happened. A, he didn't realize that I admired him, and that made him feel so good, right? Um, B, like it also allowed me to kind of use this tool as a form of communication, whereas I did admire him. There were certain things that, he maybe could have been a tiny bit better at, right? It also allowed me to communicate where I was feeling I was falling short. And in hearing from him how he saw me, I'm like, okay, like that's kind of cool that he sees me in that way. Okay. So that was the first 6 months. Fast forward, we get married. Our first year of marriage was not easy. Really was not easy. Okay. So here's what happened. We got to a point of such severe misalignment that I told him, I'm like, hey, let's do it again. Okay. At that point, there was a huge score discrepancy,
Mm.
and enough that I already know from the analytics, I can predict we will be unfulfilled. And since we're both strong people, hey, it might not work out, right? So here's what we did. We talked through it. So I was also showing up less in his eyes. He was showing up less for me in my eyes, and I was also showing up less in his eyes. Where he was showing up less was and this is nothing against him, okay? This
Right.
is just how we were both projecting into the relationship. So he was showing up less in the reliability aspect, right? He got a little lazy. Where I was showing up less was my communication style. I was very lazy and I was not speaking in a way that's conducive to a healthy relationship, and that was very important to him. I did not know this. I did not realize that he was scoring me that much less.
Mm.
He also did not realize that I needed my rock again and I needed my rock back and that he had slipped. So from these two alone, we started working our scores back up so that we could reach a place of alignment, so that we could reach back a place of admiration for each other. Does that all make
Yeah.
sense?
Oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Hmm.
With couples that I'm working with, I would say with your scores of red, yellow, and green relationships,
Hmm.
for people who are in that green place and they've scored each other 4 or 5 points higher than each other,
Hmm.
and they've gotten into relationship, sometimes the routine of living together, like living life together,
Hmm.
sometimes it starts to devolve into a different relationship than what we started out as. And those conversations need to happen.
Hmm.
But if you can't bring that up and be honest, and instead we're weaponizing that or talking about those things and then being shut down to feedback about ourselves,
Hmm.
that's also not going to get us unstuck. It's not going to
Hmm.
be able to move the two back into being able to hear the feedback and say, yeah, I can see where you're coming from. I can see
Hmm.
that about myself, that I have also devolved into where the relationship is now. And that is important to me, that I am not that person, that I am the person that I see myself as.
Absolutely. So it's interesting because that resentment or that defensiveness rather, I know that when Kevin and I, when we were hitting our dip, I was getting defensive. And when
Mm.
he was saying, hey, Zoe, such and such, like again, we weren't using this framework as a tool, which is funny because I developed it and I should have applied it right away, right? But again, you slip, you get comfortable and you get
Mm-hmm.
lazy, right?
Well,
So
and you
when
did
he
it
was
one
saying,
time. So
right.
it's
And then
done.
and by the way, I didn't realize that we were both slipping into low scores. I did
Mm-hmm.
not realize that, right? So all goes to show that you can live your day to day and you can be on autopilot and you don't realize that you're normalizing bad communication. You're normalizing, not being a rock for your
Mm-hmm.
partner, right?
Right,
All
because
to
we're
say,
tired and we just worked a long day. And do we
yeah,
really have to show up and communicate now?
yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
isn't it easier to just snap?
right.
It's not just a lot easier. Yeah, I was gonna say something about that. Oh, it totally slipped my mind. It's okay.
Yeah, the secret to long-term relationships is we have to keep circling back to those conversations. And we keep
Right.
having to put ourselves up for evaluation, give honest evaluation to our partner so that we can keep working into the relationship, or sometimes we are calling each other into this relationship where we know we can be.
Yeah, right. So what I actually meant to say earlier was I reached a point where I was getting very defensive. So Kevin would say, "Hey Zoe," and again, we didn't have we our communication was not great, right? He
Hmm.
would say, "Hey Zoe, you're not doing this and this." And in my head, I'm thinking, "Oh hell no." Like after everything, no, right? So I was getting defensive. But again, once we put pen to paper and I understood where he was coming from and he understood where I was coming from, right? I
Hmm.
think that allowed us to have sympathy for each other, right? But
Right.
also, who wants to be a low scorer in the eyes of their partner,
Hmm.
right?
Right.
Especially if it's like valid, right?
Right.
So for both of us, we acknowledged that one of the reasons why he wasn't being reliable or showing up as a rock was because of my communication. And one of the reasons for my bad communication was because I felt resentful for him not showing up as a rock, right?
Right.
So
Right.
it's this like loop of who started it first.
Hmm.
And at the end of the day, who cares?
Right.
Just work on it. Who cares who started it? Now that you know what the issue is, work on it, right?
Right. Right.
So I'm happy to say that we're now in a much healthier place. Definitely took work. And like you said earlier, who wants to work on this stuff? You've just had a long day. But
Hmm.
when you're dipping and you're unhappy and borderline like miserable,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
yeah, you have to.
Right. Because at
Yeah.
the end of the day, we do want to be satisfied in our primary relationship.
Hmm.
And it can get hard raising kids, working full time. All of those things can make it hard, but we also operate better when that relationship is strong.
Absolutely. Absolutely. My mom actually tells me because my mom loves Kevin, like loves Kevin,
Mm.
right? And she loves it when we're playing together, right? Because we banter a lot playfully and we tease each other a lot. And she tells me that when she sees me, I'm like glowing,
Mm.
right? So all to say, when you're in a place of alignment with your partner, like you feel that your happy neurochemicals start activating, whether it's your serotonin, your dopamine, your oxytocin, and all of that, right? And
Right.
that shows. It shows in how you smile, it shows in your eyes, it shows in your body language, right? So yeah, that alignment with your partner is so, so important. And then of course, as you know, that will carry to your friendships, to your work, to your image, to your bad or whatever your values might be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. That's great. I think my mom had complicated feelings about my relationship because I don't think she ever had the relationship she wanted. And so I
Yeah.
think that was difficult. I think my kids benefit when they see my husband and I in that zone, and
Yeah.
when things are really clicking and we're
Yeah.
playing together, having fun together, bantering, that
Yeah.
connection. I think, definitely the
Yeah.
kids benefit from that.
Yeah. I'm sorry to hear about your mom. That's not easy having family that.
Yeah.
So how did you get through that? How did you like work through that?
Um, I mean, I don't know that her and I were ever able to really work through that. I, that's probably a sorrow that she's passed away. So that's a sorrow that's going to, like, I had to do my own healing around that.
Hmm.
And I think I could recognize, because I knew what my parents' marriage had looked like. Um, it was me and two of my siblings who went to mom and said, please get divorced. This is not
Right.
good for anybody. So I think for me, I was not planning to get into a relationship really ever.
Oh
This was
boy.
my 18-year-old plan, right? Um,
Okay.
Seeing people that it works for a while and then it gets really ugly and you hate each other. And so why would
Hmm.
you ever do that to somebody that you started out loving when the end of that road is always we don't like each other?
Hmm.
Um, I think things about my husband and areas that I saw, we had a longer term relationship, friendship that made me think, okay, maybe you don't have to hate each other at the end of a relationship. That was where I
Hmm.
was starting. I've come a
Yeah.
long way in those years, but
Yeah.
I think it just a lot of healing for myself and setting aside my mom's opinions that she liked to offer.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, it just goes to show how much influence family, right? And how we
Hmm.
grew up, the
Right.
environment that we grew up has on our relationships.
Yeah.
I was at this like retreat, this meditation retreat, and they said something that really like hit home. They said that you're a bucket of not just your own personal experiences. You have your parents' experience within you because they projected all of that, and then they have their parents' experience, and then the parents have their experience. So who you are is literally a bucket of like experiences of generations upon generations upon
Hmm.
generations. It's not necessarily you unless you're able to separate your mind and your soul from those instincts, right? Primal instincts or subconscious wirings. Like you won't know who you truly are, and you won't be able to separate yourself,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So I felt like that to me hit home, because even within my relationship, yeah, I see a lot of my parents within my relationship, and it really bothers me
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Right.
because they didn't have a healthy relationship. They divorced eventually, but my goodness, the things that, my sister and I saw, went through, like it was hard. It was really hard. Thankfully, I would say that we both have relatively good heads on our shoulders, but like yeah, it was not easy, you
Hmm.
know. And I'll be honest with you, I'm still working through it.
Yeah.
I'm still working through it. I'm still working through reducing those patterns within my own relationship that I saw growing up because it's not healthy. And by the
Hmm.
way, like Kevin is very different to me. He's a white Caucasian male, grew up in SoCal, right? I was born in Afghanistan. We traveled a lot. So that alone, we're coming from two very different
Right.
worlds,
Right.
two very different styles of communication, two very different patterns of what we observed within our household. So that storm
Yeah. Yeah.
within the house, right? We're not speaking the same language at some point. For our
Hmm.
values, we are, but when we're both stressed out, it's two completely different languages, right?
Right. Right.
And then it got to a point where I needed to understand where my language was coming from, also where his language was coming from,
Right.
right? And minimize that and approach each other in a loving way, in a way that where we reach alignment, right?
Hmm.
And respect for each other.
Yeah. I will often say that I think relationships are people making machines. We start out in a healthy, let's say, in a healthy relationship, or sometimes we start out in most relationships feeling good about ourselves because this other person loves us.
Hmm.
And at some point, this other person knows us.
Hmm.
And being known doesn't always feel great because there's parts of ourselves that we're like, well, I don't want you to know that. I don't know that about myself. I don't like the way
Hmm.
you just summarized me. And so we're
Totally.
we're faced with these like, okay, what do I do with this feedback? How can I get comfortable being known? Not
Hmm.
just with my strengths and the areas where I shine, but how do I get known when I'm tired, when I'm burnt out, when I'm
Hmm.
stressed?
Hmm.
Because your partner is going to know those things as well.
Yeah, especially if you are not comfortable with those sides of yourself. Like, again, I realized within this relationship that I have patterns of my parents within
Hmm.
me, right? So when that was coming out within our relationship, I'm like, oh, hell no.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, so it's like, no, we're not doing this. I'm not doing this. I'm better than
Hmm.
this, right? And same thing with Kevin. So yeah, Kevin has definitely seen sides of me. I've seen sides of him, right? And it, again, if it's not checked, that can really spiral. It can really
Hmm.
spiral,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
But yeah, at the end of the day, though, at the end of the day, I will say it is comforting to have someone there who sees you and still loves you. Because at the end
Hmm.
of the day, you and your husband, you guys are still working together, to like
Hmm.
have this family, a beautiful family. Kevin and I, we're still working together to make sure that we're not giving up on each other, right?
Right.
Not to sound like we're, how do I put it? Not to sound like we're a struggling couple, but it is to say, hey, marriage is difficult,
Hmm.
right? And you need tools and you need self-awareness to get yourself out of these dips and bring yourself back to a place of kindness.
Yeah. Well,
Hmm.
I think human beings are complex and, we require work on ourselves. So it
Hmm.
should not be surprising that our relationship is also going to require continual work
Hmm.
and continual awareness and intentionality to make
Yeah.
it work and to make it satisfying and meaningful.
Hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And like, I talk about the green zone. One
Hmm.
thing I say in the book about the green zone is don't assume you'll stay there forever. Like,
Exactly.
someone might lose their job and that stress will be projected into the relationship. It's normal. You guys live together.
Hmm.
Like sometimes we don't get a chance to reset or recharge, especially if kids are involved, right?
Hmm.
If there's a mortgage and now all of a sudden you're thinking, how can I pay my portion or anything at all? Like, so green zone is the goal, but it doesn't stop there. It's now staying there,
Right.
right? And working on the relationship. Earlier, you mentioned boredom and you mentioned, like the mundane day-to-day thing, right? That can absolutely be a thing,
Hmm.
right? Especially if you're someone who grew up in dysfunction where unpredictability is how you're wired to love, right? And impulsivity. Sorry,
Impulsivity.
thank you. Impulsivity. Yeah, so if you're wired for that and all of a sudden you're in a safe, stable relationship, it's like your brain's like, where's the drama? Where's
Hmm.
the fun? Yeah,
Where's
that's
the
not.
passion?
Where's the passion? Yeah, and there are ways to bring that without
Yeah.
being a jerk to each other. You know
Right.
what I mean?
Without having to always be making up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Exactly.
Well, and
So go ahead.
I was going to say,
Mhm.
I love that your algorithm doesn't just focus on this other person, but also focuses on the self because having been
Mhm.
in a long-term relationship, there are times where I'm thinking of grief and loss. We've both gone through that with our parents and
Yeah.
we both handled that differently.
Mhm.
And there were times where he's in a grief state because of a loss and he stayed there for a while.
Mhm.
And I couldn't just call him back in and be like, hey, we're a green couple. Where are you at? What are you doing? I had to just stay where I was
Mhm.
and allow him the space to grieve. And he did a lot of that by himself. He wasn't really expressive during that time. I would say he got through that and could
Mhm.
express it and talk about
Mhm.
what was happening. But at the time, he was not verbally processing. And so
Yeah.
we're functioning. We were still both functioning, but I couldn't say, hey, you're here too long. This is
Yeah.
uncomfortable for me. It was
Yeah.
uncomfortable
Mhm.
because growing up, I learned that disconnection is what leads to the end of a relationship. And I had to be reminding myself this is not him disconnecting because he doesn't love me. This
Yeah.
is him disconnecting over grief and loss.
Yeah. Yeah. That's such a powerful self-awareness. So for one, the fact that you have the compassion and the kindness to kind of give him the space to, take as much time as he needed, but also to remind yourself that it's not about you, right? And it
Mm-mm.
also goes to show that green zone couples will not necessarily stay there. It's not realistic. And it also
Yeah.
is not conducive necessarily for a strong relationship. Like, I do believe that the strongest relationships are the ones who have experienced struggles because then you get to communicate. And then when you communicate, you get to build that bond even more, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I can absolutely, I hear you where it's like, what do you do and what do you say? It's this person's or it's your husband's grief and not trauma, but their pain. How do you tell
Mm-hmm.
someone stop hurting?
Right.
Get over it, like, especially when we're talking about parents,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
at least you knew, and at least it was at the forefront because I've been in situations where I did not realize that Kevin was hurting about something. So he
Mm-hmm.
doesn't necessarily communicate, right? If it's something to do, something outside of our relationship. right? And I'm not
Mm-hmm.
going to go into specifics. But I don't know that he's affected.
Mm-hmm.
All I know is that in our relationship, like it's being projected. I just don't realize that it's a projection. I think that it's me.
Mm-hmm.
So then I come strong. Like, why is this happening?
Right.
Right? And then he's still not necessarily open to communicating, not unless I really drag it out of him, or not unless I see it for myself and
Right.
I can identify this is where this crap is coming from,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I think in your case, I at least like you had the intelligence, the knowledge, the experience to know where that was coming from, right? And the
Right.
transparency as well. I think for a lot of couples, because we try to be strong and we don't want to show that we're hurting, or we don't even want to talk about it and we just want to repress it,
Mm-hmm.
then it just projects into the relationship and the other person's like, what the fuck just happened? Excuse my language,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
But like what like why like why are you giving me attitude?
Right. Right. Where did you go?
Also,
Yeah.
where did you go? Where's your spirit? I want your spirit.
Mm-hmm.
I want you. And if they're completely elsewhere because subconsciously they're focused on something else, right? Imagine like on your phone, you've got like 20 apps running, right? It's going to be so slow. So now, so same thing as a human when, a human is like in your presence, but they've got these 20 other things running in the back of their minds, they're gonna not show up
Mm-hmm.
as present. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah.
So when you're talking, we've talked a lot about the green zone. When you're talking about red zone, yellow zone, what do you
Hmm.
tell people if they are scoring in the red zone?
Hmm.
What do you tell them?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, before you can quote unquote fix your partner or communicate, the issues with your partner, you got to work on yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So what we found from the analytics is that the average self-score for women is 76%. The average self-score for men was 73%. If you're a woman and you're below, let's say 70%, that is an indicator that you could feel better about yourself and that you should feel better about yourself because that indicates low self-esteem.
So the
And
76 and 73 cutoff, those were more green score people, self scores.
yeah,
Okay. Okay.
so the couples that were currently together, I think they were exactly 78%.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, 76% exactly.
Okay.
But women in general seem to have 76% self-score, and men in general have 73. So
Okay.
the interpretation of that is that the average self-esteem, if we were to apply a numerical assessment to it, for women it's 76%, and the average self-esteem for men is a 73%. So if you're below that, you likely have low self-esteem. If you're above that, then you're doing great. You're doing
Mhm.
great. Um, so with that said, if you're in a red zone, right, the likely score for you will be that you don't feel great about yourself. If you do feel great about yourself, but you're in a toxic relationship, that means that you're likely in a yellow zone, not a red zone.
Okay.
Okay. So the yellow zone means that you have a high self-score, but your partner, you don't think highly of them. That may be projected into the relationship, or if they don't think that highly of themselves, they will project that insecurity into the relationship, and then you'll both have a lack of fulfillment. They'll
Okay.
feel like you're not giving enough from an undertone of insecurity, and you'll feel like you're drained by constantly
Hmm.
having to reassure this person. Okay,
Okay.
not healthy. But again, if you're in the red zone, first and foremost, evaluate your self score. If you have a low self score, you got to work on that. There are two ways to work on that. First way is change your perception. Are you being hard on yourself?
Mm.
Right? If career happens to be one of your values, are you 23 years old? If you are, give yourself a bit of slack. It's
Yeah.
okay. You probably just finished school. You know what I mean? Chill.
Yeah. You may not know what you
It,
want to do yet.
or
That's
you might
okay.
not know. Yeah, it's okay. You're on a path.
Yeah.
Don't give yourself a 60%, right? But like be fair to yourself. The fact that you're even putting that as a top value shows that you care.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as you care, the universe will reward that. God will reward that. You will reward yourself. Your subconscious will seek ways and opportunities to build on that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's one way. Here's a second way in terms of how I understand it. So I'm a spiritual person. I believe in the universe giving to you the things that you focus on. Okay.
Okay.
If you focus on career and you write out your affirmations or you pray or you meditate, whatever your meditation may be, right? Everyone has their own way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in my opinion, the universe will eventually bring you gifts, right? Give you gifts that will validate a high score for that particular value, which in this case would be career. Okay. So, very quick story about me. 5, 6 years ago, I hit my absolute rock bottom. Okay. My career was nowhere. I was broke. I had, yeah, it was just not a good self score. I think I was rating myself like a 60 or 65% or something. So what I did was in the background of my phone, I put in gold 90% in gold,
Mm.
right?
Okay.
So essentially to me, in my mind, I understood that the 90% was to represent how I would show up, like, and how I would measure against my own standards, right? Against my own values. And you know what? Within 3 months, my business started booming. My purpose, which is my book, right, started taking shape.
Mm-hmm.
Like my image was a lot better because I stopped drinking, right? I
Mm-hmm.
was also like, it's not like I was drinking heavily, but enough that it was affecting my energy, it was affecting my skin. It was, I just could have been better. I could have felt
Mm-hmm.
better, right? And I met Kevin. So
Okay.
I put that in the background of my phone, I think in April, in July, we met,
Mm.
right? And I think I put it in the background of my phone in April. In May, I closed my first contract in my company that is now a successful company, right?
Right.
All to say, yes, a big part of that is your subconscious and how you view yourself. But another part of it is I believe the universe will reward you. You just have to be specific with the universe about what you want,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Again, that's just like my little my little
Right.
spiel on that in terms of truly like this is a very effective tool for manifestation.
Yeah. Well, and it's not like you just are putting it out into the universe and doing nothing. In your
Hmm.
example, you quit drinking.
Hmm.
You started looking at areas like, okay, what can I do to help myself feel better while
Hmm.
I keep this in mind and put this out into the universe as well.
Yeah,
It's that team effort, right? It's not like take the will and if you don't, then it's not my fault. No, you have to do some intentional things to also move yourself there.
absolutely. And also, if you're listing out your top 5 values and you just put pen to paper, subconsciously you'll start going towards that direction. So if, for example, one of your values happens to be education or knowledge, you'll want to listen to podcasts, you'll want to read articles, you'll want to know more about world news, right? Education doesn't have to be a bachelor's or a master's or a PhD. There are so many ways to gain education, right?
Right.
And also understand that the universe is very creative. Put it out there and just be open to what comes to you, but at least at that point your subconscious will be wired to accept the gift rather than push it
Right.
away.
Right. To see it and
Hmm.
recognize it.
Yeah,
Did
exactly.
you find in your data that the values mattered? Which values, like you mentioned up front, having values of what was it? Reliability, honesty. But then we've also talked about career and
Hmm.
what
Hmm.
did you find in defining the values for people?
Yeah. So across the board, the majority of people put honesty, dependability, reliability as their top value across the board. So there's a second part of the framework for trait preferences. So whereas values focuses on lifestyle, right, and compatibility, traits focuses on what you're actually attracted to, what you feel magnetized to. Okay.
Okay.
Here's what we found. The number one trait across the board, man, woman, age group did not matter. It was generosity and kindness. Okay.
Okay.
So that to me was very reassuring for us humans as a species, that at least for the
Or
most
sometimes
part,
we can question whether we're actually good people.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Here's the thing though, with trait preferences, they're not necessarily positive, right? You can have a trait preference towards someone who's emotionally unavailable without realizing it.
Mm.
You can have a trait preference that's not conducive to a healthy relationship. Before I met Kevin, I had a couple trait preferences that were neutral, but also like, why was I pushing the other groups away? So one of my trait preferences was age, older than me,
Mm.
and Kevin is actually younger than me, so I kicked that pattern out of my, wiring. And the other one was a cultural background, right? I assumed that I would be more attracted to someone that is of similar culture than me, right? Not true. Kevin, in fact, like I mentioned earlier, he's a white Caucasian, born and raised in Southern California. He makes me laugh like literally no one else, right? Plus, we are very aligned with how we view politics, how we view the world. So it's like, why did I need that? Why did I need that? So all to
Hmm.
say, I can't say that I necessarily identified values or traits that are more leaning towards, how do I put it? Um, like people who were currently together, because it seemed like across the board, whether it was a mutual breakup, they broke up with them, whatever it may be, the number one was always honesty and dependability, right?
Okay.
Number two tended to be communication manners. Same thing with traits. The number one was generosity. But what I will say is that if the trait preferences tended to be something more destructive, such as being attracted to controlling people, being attracted to abusive people, or being attracted to seemingly neutral traits, but actually, like for my example, like age and culture, right?
Hmm.
It sounds neutral, but it wasn't. It wasn't. I was actually pushing away like potential relationships that could have made
Hmm.
it work. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I don't know if I answered that, but
No, I mean, you could have, most people will say age difference doesn't make a difference. But I think sometimes, depending on how young the one person is and how old the other person is, there can be a tendency towards some controlling patterns or some disrespectful patterns, like, well, you don't know.
exactly. Thank you so much for kind of laying all of that in. You're exactly right. Because when I was dating older men, you're right, it came with an authoritative dominance, right?
Hmm.
A dominant presence. And yeah, in the beginning, it's kind of fun. It's like whatever. But eventually, it's like that is not good for a healthy relationship. You want to be with an
Hmm.
equal,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And also, I know that before Kevin, I kind of reached a point of not admiration, but infatuation to someone who fit that description, right? So it can really play with your mind, right? So that exactly to your point, what is seemingly neutral may not necessarily be neutral, and
Hmm.
that may be tied with destructive patterns, right?
Yeah. So you would have to look at those trait preferences and what is the pattern that's coming with that.
Yeah, I mean, for anyone who keeps falling into toxic patterns with their partner, and we're talking pattern, that means that
Hmm.
it's happening over and over again, right? So you
Right.
keep falling into a dynamic of self-sacrifice or self-focus over and over again, right?
Right.
The key thing is to recognize your own trait preferences, right?
Yes.
Why are you attracting these people? Are you attracting people with narcissistic traits? Not necessarily narcissists,
Hmm.
right? Because that's a severe personality disorder, but some people can have traits of narcissism,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And if yes, do you constantly feel like you need to show up for that person over and over again to validate them, to reassure them, or are you yourself acting as a hero? Do you feel like you need to fix someone? So are you looking for someone who's broken? Because if that's your pattern and you're putting that into your calculation, yeah, like that's not going to be conducive to a healthy relationship, clearly,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
So as we're wrapping up, give me the title of the book again.
Sure. It's called Love Can, in Fact, Be Calculated.
Yeah, I like that. That's a good title. I don't know if you
Thank
came up
you.
with it or if somebody changed it for you, but that's a great title.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
actually me. I came up with
Okay,
it.
good
And
job.
believe me, it took a long
Oh, I
time.
bet.
Long time. My poor husband.
Yeah.
Because I kept on checking with him. I'm like, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? He got over it. That's
Yeah,
he's
he's
like, babe,
like,
just do
I
it.
just pick one. Just pick one.
Just pick
Yeah.
one.
I had a client a couple
Exactly.
months ago. He came into a session. He's like, I decided what the title of your book should be. And I was like, I'm not writing a book.
I love
And
that.
he was
So
like,
what did he say?
he said, I think your book should just be titled Enough. Everything you've taught me, it is about being enough. I don't have
I
to be
love
perfect. I
that.
don't have to. He's like, I think you should write that book. And I was like,
Yeah.
okay, well, anyway, how are you?
Yeah, but also the double meaning there, like
Mhm.
enough of my own bullshit,
Yes,
enough of
right,
my own
right.
crap, like
Yeah,
put a stop to this, like start new patterns and
yes,
whatever.
yeah,
That's an excellent name.
yeah, yeah.
Well, I'll definitely be
So,
picking it up. You let me know.
okay, yeah.
Let me know.
Well, Zoe, it was so nice having you on the podcast. I really appreciated your getting into some of the details of the book. I will put a link in the show notes to your book and
Thanks.
the work that you have done to try to make relationships a little bit more understandable, what we're getting into, because we are complex and relationships are complex. And I think sometimes that can feel overwhelming when it might not need to be.
Thank you so much, Jackie. I really appreciate you having me here. It's been so much fun. And yeah, I'll be around
Okay.
if you ever
Yep.
want to do it again.
Yeah. Sounds good. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll see you. Bye bye.
Bye.
Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed that podcast episode I recorded with Zoe. If you have any comments or thoughts or questions, I'd love for you to start a discussion in the comment section wherever you are listening to this podcast. And please, if you haven't already, go ahead and rate, review, subscribe to the podcast. And at the end of this episode, I want to remind you that your story matters. Remember, there's something meaningful in every chapter. Don't wait to share your story until it's finished. Until next time, Jackie.